Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's bright and early here in Chicago, and it, it's a pleasure to be with you. I do not have my jersey, unfortunately. It hasn't arrived yet. UPS Informed Delivery promises me that it will be delivered by 9 p.m. tonight. So close, but no cigar. So instead, I decided to go with, and you can see it, I decided to go with local pride, chippy Chicago Python shirt instead. I hope that works. So I guess I kind of need to, I don't know, warn you, I suppose, that I'm not actually going to be using conventional slides. This is, I suppose, a quirk of mine, but honestly, for the sort of thing that I will be discussing, a series of bullet points is not going to add a thing. Now, what I will do is abuse Zoom's background feature and actually shows some images that I think are at least vaguely related, and you all can speculate as to when this whole attempt ends in a spectacular technical failure. It may be kind of part of the excitement of live coding. So we'll see how that goes. And I suppose also, it's like, I don't know, I don't want to say apologize, but acknowledge that I'm going to be hitting you first thing on Monday morning with serious stuff. I hope by the time we reach the end of this, there will be some positives. But that's kind of where we're at, I guess. This talk is called Inclusion and Community in the Face of Crisis. I started talking about this topic 2 years ago when the pandemic started, and I had expected, I had hoped that by now we would be right out of crises, but they just keep on coming. So it's still pretty topical. And I guess you could say that we are now living in interesting times. May you live in interesting times is not, in spite of what you heard, actually an ancient Chinese curse. There is no evidence that it was said that way in China at all. But I think under the circumstances these days, many of us might feel like it might as well be a curse. And so when I say that I'm talking about community in the face of crisis, I've got 4 crises in mind that are top of mind. The first one being, of course, the issue of climate change. The news here keeps getting worse. I can't see how any reasonable person would have any doubts that this is a reality and a serious one. We will continue to face all sorts of effects. Fires now in Texas, last year in many places, the Northwest, in California, and around the world, Spain, also Brazil. I mean, many places that way. We're looking forward to increased killer heat waves. We will have in some parts of the world drought and in other parts flood. In general, weather events will become more extreme. And on top of all of that, we have sea level rising, which is a bad news for the many, many, many people in the world who live on a coast. And all of this will lead to all sorts of bad things. I mean, hunger, migrations, there will be need for increased aid in many, many places. In other words, this is all a collection of a huge problem, huge potential challenges. And then, of course, my second candidate is our friend COVID-19, the pandemic. We're now more than 2 years into COVID-19. It was 2 years and a week ago, in fact, that I started working from home as we shut down, and I have yet to return to the office. We have learned more about hand washing, mask making, R factors, vaccine effectiveness, social distancing than we ever wanted to know. And, in the course of the pandemic, at least conservative estimates, 6 million people have died. We don't know how many people are suffering from long-term effects, nor are we entirely certain yet what those effects will be. I think as concerning, there are a couple of other things that are consequences of this. So in education, I think anybody who's a parent maybe would support this, but in many, many cases, we have found out that Zoom school isn't real school. I saw a study that came out of Spain last week that in sort of your run-of-the-mill state-run schools, about a half year's progress in math was lost in the course of 2020. So that is definitely concerning. We're facing a generation of kids coming up that are going to have an additional challenge in their education. And not only that, but this was something that I think kind of surprised me. As we went into lockdown 2 years ago, in following what was going on, I expected that we would enter a worldwide depression, that everybody would be suffering the economic effects of this. And of course, I was really influenced by what I read, but it turned out that everybody was sort of surprised by this, in that, in fact, the overall economy did not really go into repression. It actually sort of bounced back surprisingly quickly. And, as it turned out, people like us, I know, in certainly my case, I was able to keep working from home. I did not lose my job. I suffered relatively no economic effects. And I think a lot of us in our business were sort of in the same boat. What was unexpected, though, as the economy bounced back was another effect, which was basically that the poorest people tended to suffer most. And I suppose that's not so surprising. They have the fewest resources to begin with. But the very, very wealthiest, that tiny fraction of the 1% that are billionaires, actually increased their wealth by, frankly, an obscene amount. And this, I think, is a really concerning consequence of the pandemic. It was going on before, but this made it worse, and that is this concentration of wealth in the hands of a very, very few. This is a problem that we will live with for some time, and in my mind, it is a serious problem. Then, I guess candidate number 3 is our current political strife. We are living in an age of great polarization. A couple of years ago, police brutality, police murders caused demonstrations worldwide for Black Lives Matter. Those problems have not been resolved. And I think even more concerning has been the continuing rise, which I think also has been accelerated in the pandemic, of populist groups that have basically repressive goals. They want to remove rights from women, from LGBT. There is a move to demonize foreigners and Arab xenophobia. And all of these things are going on, not just in the United States, of course, but around the world in many, many places. This is truly a frightening thing. And, it's kind of reached a point where even public health is becoming politicized, to the point that in many places, again, not just in the US, although we have some notable examples, politicians are actively pushing public health policies that are likely to kill some of the people who voted for them. This is madness. And then, finally, as Calvin alluded to, we have the most recent war. And honestly, I find myself at a loss for words. This is the largest war in Europe in 75 years. I think many of us thought that something like this couldn't happen again. The injustice and the brutality of the invasion are beyond obvious, and clearly the people of Ukraine deserve all of our support. But this is concerning for the entire world on a number of levels. We are now closer to mutually assured destruction than we have been since I was a small child. And the fact that this war is also sort of in an area that produces a lot of food for the world, and in Russia, a lot of fertilizer for the world, means that there are going to be, I think, some serious global consequences to this. And beyond the displacement, death, destruction, the pain for far too many, the end of this is still far from clear. It is a concerning situation. I lived through, I can recall the last Cold War, the amount of resources wasted in arms and armies, suspicion, repression, paranoia. It is truly a sobering prospect that we face these days. And I think we should keep in mind that it is not just Ukraine where people are facing attacks and suffering from, quote, military operations. It is in a lot of places. So, if I were of a bit more of a mystical turn, I would say that here we have in climate change, pandemic, political strife, and war, we have the four horsemen of our apocalypse. I sincerely hope that's not true, but it is certainly a serious time that we live in. So I am quite old. And these are likely to be the most challenging times I have seen, I would say easily. I remember the 60s and 70s. There was a lot of strife and a lot of things going on. There were racial protests, there were war protests, there were dictators throughout the world. There was the Cold War, as I mentioned, the Cuban Missile Crisis. All of these things went on, and yet, as I look back, I do not see that things were as serious then as I see them now. I think that what is going on these past few years and what will continue to go on is going to impact a generation. When I think back, the nearest thing I can think of that is similar is what my parents, probably for many of you grandparents, went through in the 1930s and the 1940s with the Great Depression and World War II, and similar economic strife, political strife, social upheaval, all of those things that were involved then. So, as I say, it's kind of a serious topic for a Monday morning. I agree, but I think it's important for us as a Python community to be aware of this and occasionally to actually talk about it. I believe the sacred text says something like explicit is better than implicit. I think maybe that applies here. So, our code and all of our activities as a Python community exist in the context of our wider communities, our families and friends, our local communities, our regional communities, nations, whatever it might be. And, what goes on in those contexts, what goes on in the world around us, will definitely impact what we do inside our little Python communities, and sometimes even impact our ability to do things like Python. So, as chair of the PSF for a number of years, I got in the habit of thinking about um, all of the Python community kind of more in a global context. And, I'm not in that role anymore. And let me be clear, what I'm saying here is not speaking for Python Software Foundation or anything like that. But I still am in the habit of thinking that way. And that's what kind of prompts me to share some of these perspectives, maybe from the point of view of what I saw in looking at communities worldwide. Because, we're completely in this together. And I think we need to, as a community, acknowledge that and think about what we will do going forward. I guess I should also kind of emphasize that we have Python community members all around the world. Clearly, we have Python community members in Ukraine. I have to point out, we also have Python community members in Russia, just as we do in the Republic of China and Taiwan, just as we do in Syria, Iraq, and Iran, and many other places. And they are all members of the Python community as well. So this is something that I think affects us as a Python community, the things that are going on. I would hope that if nothing else, the pandemic has taught us we can't afford to ignore somebody sick in Wuhan, China, or there's some variant of a virus in Southern Africa. These things all affect us. And I guess also going forward, I think we need to accept that things will be different than they were before. Just to pick a couple of easy examples, I think that the way that we look at travel, which is something a lot of us in our communities have done, will be different. I think travel will become reduced, will become more expensive, will become more challenging. Not just the effects lingering from the pandemic; those are still with us in many places, but also climate concerns, I think, are going to make us question a lot of travel. And probably in the current environment, security concerns. Is this a place in the world that is safe to go to? This may again become something that we can worry about more. And all of this will impact the way that we build our communities. And I will talk a little bit about that. And I think the times ahead may also impact the resources that our Python communities have to do the things that we have done in the past. So that's kind of the worst part of it, let's say. So how do we process this? How do we process our feelings in terms of, well, what is in effect going to be in some ways loss, grief, in other ways restricted activities, all of these different things. How, in the face of these problems, do we find resilience? And for this, the first thing that I think of is what's known as the Stockdale paradox. It's named after Jim Stockdale, who was a Navy flyer who was shot down and captured during the Vietnam War. And he was held for a number of years and tortured in the infamous Hanoi Hilton. And after that war ended and he was released, he started to ask himself and to write about uh, what was a question for him, which was why he had managed to survive when other people he knew in the same situation with him had not. And what arose from this was the Stockdale paradox. The people who went into that situation with an unbounded sense of optimism, the ones who said, we're going to be out of here by Christmas, the war is going to be over by Easter, those were the ones who didn't make it. Because as time went on and they weren't out by Christmas and the war wasn't over by Easter, as those things happened, in effect, it sort of broke them. Whereas the people who acknowledged going in that this is a terrible situation and this is going to be really, really hard and it is not going to get better right away, but we are going to do everything we can to keep going, and someday we will get out of this. Those were the ones that actually survived. So that's the significance of the quote. You must never confuse the faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. So I know I've already done something to present some of those brutal facts that we're facing now. So the second question is, how in the face of what can be fear, what can be grief for loss of people, livelihoods, homes, whatever that might be, and what I think for a number of us these days is also true in the face of what is becoming like exhaustion and even hopelessness. How do we find that optimism, that will to carry on? And for me, one of my favorite references here, one of my favorite quotes here is a quote by Noam Chomsky. He wrote, "Optimism is a strategy for making a better future. Because unless you believe that the future can be better, it's unlikely you will step up and take responsibility for making it so. If you assume that there is no hope, you guarantee that there will be no hope. The choice is yours." So those are great words. I mean, I would like to suggest, I hope to suggest to you that a part of finding that optimism, that belief in a better future can come from both participating in and building communities like our Python communities. And not only do I believe they can help, I think since the pandemic, I have been seeing them help throughout the world. So I think this happens in a number of ways. I think one important thing we gain from being part of any community, our Python communities, is a sense of belonging, of not being alone. It's really important, I think, to maintain our connections. And this might be through meetups or conferences or things like that. Since the beginning of the pandemic, it has truly been amazing to see how conferences and meetups have thrived online and have become much more global. When everyone is online, both organizers and speakers are free to roam the world. I know that I have spoken from Mallorca to Stockholm to PyCon Thailand to Bolivia, many places around the world over the past couple of years. And I think this has truly been a power of the Python community to help us kind of maintain those connections and in the face of those challenges. And I think as we move back to conferences in person, And I am truly looking forward to it. In a month's time, we will have PyCon. I think that is something that many of us need. But as we move back towards in-person conferences, I think we also will want to take special care to make sure that we don't lose those global connections and all of that we've gained by being remote the past few years. So it will be a challenge, and different places will meet it differently, but I think that is our current goal, is to move forward without losing those people. And I think that it's also really important to acknowledge that having support networks, even online support networks, is really vital. Particularly in the harder times that the people face, the more important it is to have some sort of support network, somebody to talk to, somebody to make you feel like you're not alone, that can offer the support that you need in tough times. And for that, I think also we need to keep in mind that we need to keep those networks of connections as broad as possible. In tough times, people maybe who've been marginalized or had problems in other areas may have some really great perspectives on how to deal with whatever crisis. So I think it's really important to do that. I think the other thing that we gain from our communities is a sense of purpose. And in particular, I think we've seen with Python communities that sense of purpose tends to be in educating others, in helping others get their start, mentoring, things like that. So that has been, I think, a very powerful thing for Python communities. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we also saw an explosion in online courses, online workshops, Twitch streams going through this and that. I know I did some Twitch streams myself. This sharing of knowledge, I think, has given us kind of a shared purpose that I think has been enormously helpful. And again, teaching others has always been important to us. And I think as we go back to in-person events, here again, we're going to want to be sure that we think of ways to include the people who can't make it to in-person events for whatever reason, because this interest, this drive to teach is one of the important things we do. It's one of the ways that we can help people who need it most, because quite often it's various minorities, women, people from other disadvantaged backgrounds who need this kind of help the most in terms of being able to find employment, get new careers, things like that. And those are also the people who are most likely to suffer when times are hard. They're usually the ones who are fired first and have the fewest resources to begin with. So that too, I think, is something that we want to keep in mind as we move forward. And then finally, I think another important thing that our communities, our Python community and others can provide us is a sense of responsibility. A responsibility to our wider community, a responsibility to others. I've seen this in a lot of ways. This too is something that since the beginning of the pandemic has shown itself in many remarkable ways. We have in our communities helped our wider communities with data analysis by sharing data with all sorts of things. One example I can point to is Brazil.io, which was created by Álvaro Justin and some other people in Brazil, created by volunteers, maintained by volunteers. I know that for at least the first year, but I think it continues to be for the first year of the pandemic, It was the best source for data on the COVID-19 pandemic in Brazil. Far better than any of the government sites. It aggregated all of the data from Brazil and was kind of the best source. And that was people working from the Python community to help their wider community. So yeah, very impressive. And another one that is something that I guess honestly makes me proud to be part of the Python community is a project called ayudapy.org. This was created pretty much single-handedly by Marco Lando in Paraguay and Asunción. And it was a web app to help people during the beginnings of the pandemic, although it continues today, to either say that they needed help and what kind of help, or to say that they could offer help. And the interesting thing about it is that it was tied to the locations of those people, so that you could say, I'm in this part of Asunción and we need diapers desperately, and somebody else could see that and then could contact you privately and say, okay, we're going to meet at the corner of such and such and such and such, and I can give you what you need. This strikes me as just a grand idea, and a way that basically someone with the skills in technology could actually help people in this community in a very material way. So yeah, I am truly proud to know Marco, and I'm happy that he was recently made a fellow of the Python Software Foundation. He more than deserves it. And it's this sense of responsibility, when you think about it, that has always driven a lot of people. It's what drives the core developers to do all of the many hours of work that they do. In terms of kind of maintaining this language that gives us our entire ecosystem. And in turn, it's what drives all of the other developers who create all of the other pieces of that marvelous ecosystem. So there is this value in shared responsibility that I think we all feel as being part of our community. And I think that is something that cannot be undervalued. I think it's something that in every case needs to be respected and valued and honored. And I think finally we come down to, we are a community. I suppose maybe you could say we're a global community of other communities in the Python world. And we have this understanding of technology that we can use in a wider sense to support our communities. And we can also use that, I think, to maintain and build our own connections. And we've been doing this for years. This is not something new, but I think that with our current set of challenges, perhaps people have found a new sense of urgency. And perhaps we've also seen the importance of it to other people. So, we need to continue. We need to continue to do this, to use every tool and technique we've got to support, our Python communities, but then the communities around us that we are a part of. And, I think we can also continue. We also need to continue with our emphasis on education and helping people learn, inviting people into our communities and then helping them learn. Not only to become parts of our communities, that's good, but also to help them find perhaps new ways of earning a living, to help them understand the technology around them and how sometimes it is used for us and sometimes it is used against us. We can help analyze data and share data with people. We can create these services that bring people together and help them help each other. all of that kind of boils down to we can use what we know in the Python community to take care of each other and the world around us, to help those who need it, and to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind. Those are the things that I think we are capable of doing as a Python community. So not only that, I think, but I think we can, as members of our particular community, I think we can be leaders in our wider communities, both as informed citizens, as people who have been part of a global community and perhaps have had a chance to understand people from different parts of the world, different places. And also because with our experience in community, we can advocate for that spirit of community. So, these are times, I think, where we must actually work to build community. This is not a time to turn inward and turn away from our communities. Quite the opposite. One of my fellow board members, when I was on the Python Software Foundation board, would sometimes quietly observe that, in the grand scheme of things, the PSF and Python communities aren't that important. We're just enthusiasts of a programming language, after all. And much as I love them, I think that in this one, I have to disagree. In times like these, communities, all communities, but particularly global communities like ours, are truly valuable. They give us a way to belong, a way to include others, to connect with others, and to understand others. But they also, help us organize, help us volunteer, help us contribute. So we have these communities as a way that we can come together to understand each other and to take care of each other. And I think that really all of us in Python communities understand that. We feel the power of community. In the past decade, we have built Python communities around the world. And again, a truly surprising explosion of growth there. So now, in these times of crisis, is when we need that power of community more than ever. So thank you so much for listening. And as you go about the conference these 5 days, I encourage you not only to share knowledge, but to build your connections. And let's continue to grow our communities. So thank you very much. And I guess I will be following everyone's directions as to what I'm supposed to do next, but thank you.